welcome you to Waterloo, Wisconsin, about 40 minutes northeast of the state capital in Madison, where it's the UCI Cyclo-cross World Cup season opener. I'm Steve Schlanger with the professional cyclocross and mountain biker Ellen Noble, who joins us here today for the first of 16 races on the World Cup schedule for this season. It is also the first of 3 North American stops over the course of this next week, as the series will head on to Fayetteville, Arkansas midweek, and then Iowa City 1 week from today. Good crowd on what is a cloudy and windy day in Wisconsin, as we take a look at some of the previous World Cup winners, and a lot of Belgian names and similar frequent Belgian names on this chart. Wout van Aert, Toon Aerts, Mathieu van der Poel, some of the high-profile names in this sport. We'll get to the field in a moment, but the weather is also a consideration for this race today, because some rain is starting to fall. Not heavily, but ever so slightly at the moment. They had rain earlier today after a hot and dry Saturday here in Waterloo, so things are changing by the moment. And let's now hear from some of the top riders expected to take the start line in just a few moments.
How does it feel to be back in Waterloo?
Yeah, pretty fine for us. They treat us very well at the track factory over here. The whole week we are here for breakfast, lunch, trainings. They even make dinner and bring it to our hotel. So those guys did an amazing job, and we tried to give them something back today at their home track.
Je hebt fijne herinneringen aan Waterloo. Je hebt hier gewonnen en vreemd genoeg niet in die moddereditie.
Nee, inderdaad. Je zou zeggen dat de laatste keer dat hier cross was, dat op mijn lijf geschreven was. Maar daar was ik tweede, dat was niet slecht, maar had iets beter gekund natuurlijk. Maar een van de mooiste momenten uit mijn carrière tot dusver was de winst hier in 2018, denk ik. Samen met Wout van Aert vooruit en dan op plaats naar de overwinning rijden. Dat was een heel mooi moment.
Je hebt een aantal wedstrijden al gewonnen, vlot gewonnen. Heb je ook opgebouwd naar deze wereldbeker?
Ja, normaal wel. Ik was heel goed vertrokken, de snellere parcours ligt mij ook wel iets beter, dus ben ik blij vandaag dat het toch iets sneller ligt. Ik denk wel dat ik nog werk heb naar de toekomst toe voor die iets modderige parcours. Maar ik denk hier in Amerika dat we toch altijd wel snelle wedstrijden zullen krijgen, dus dat moet mij normaal wel heel goed liggen.
Winning the overall World Cup, is that a goal this season?
Yeah, that's the main goal for the whole season. It's a GC that I've never won, so it's something that's very big on my list. I'm still 23, but I want really to win it this year. It's a new GC, very nice races, a lot of countries, and yeah, the most overall rider can win this GC. So I hope I will be it this year.
Quinten Hermans, you are pretty good. I think you are having a good shape for the moment. You are feeling the same?
Yes, I think so. The trip to the US has been good. The jet lag has been quite okay actually, and before I went to the US, I had a couple of hard training weeks in Belgium, and this week was focused on relaxing, and I think that worked out quite well for my feeling today. But still have to wait for the race.
How do you feel just before the American World Cup in Waterloo?
Yeah, the feeling is good. I don't know what I expected today, but yeah, the feeling is good. So I want to race, so we will see.
A technical and fast course, that's something for you normally.
Yes, for sure today with a lot of wind, so maybe it's tactical, but maybe from the first round is maybe one rider away, and yeah, we will see. So yeah.
Ellen Noble, glad to have you with us here today as the riders get set to take the start. What stands out to you about what could be decisive in this race among the men today?
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I think something that's kind of decisive today is it's one of the few World Cups that we're going to see without Wout van Aert or Mathieu van der Poel. So we have, I always think, very exciting racing, kind of without the usual suspects at the front. So very excited to see Toon Aerts and some of the other guys kind of do what they can.
Yeah, there is no Wout van Aert, there is no Mathieu van der Poel here at this race or in the U.S. this year. How dominant have those two been? Well, when you look back at the last few World Championships, the last 7 gold medals and rainbow jerseys have been won by either Van der Poel or Wout van Aert.
We see Kerry Warner going to the line. He's our American sweetheart on the front row. Also our Pan-American champion.
The top riders will start in the front row based on UCI points. We have 48 riders in the field altogether. 14 Americans on the home soil, 13 Belgians, which are always a very strong nation, 5 from the Netherlands. And one of the Belgians, Quinten Hermans.
Quentin's made the trip over for many years, so it seems like that's paying off for him, and he said that the jet lag didn't feel too bad this trip, which is nice to see.
This is the first of 3 North American stops over the next week.
This is Vincent Basins. He always comes over early and does a ton of UCI races prior to these World Cups, so it's nice to see. Looks like that effort's paying off for him with the front row start today.
He won 2 races in Baltimore at a lower level.
And 2 races in
last
Rochester.
Weekend, right?
Yeah.
Rochester and Baltimore.
This is Michael Van Tornhout. He got married in August, which is very exciting. Congrats to him.
And this is Eisenbeatz, a continental champion from Belgium and the defending champion of this race when it was last held back in 2019. It was canceled last year because of the pandemic, and this is now the 4th ever edition of the Waterloo World Cup stop. And Toon Aerts, the winner here back in 2018, trying to win the World Cup overall series for the 3rd time. He would be just the 4th man to ever do it. So trying to join some elite company, as you see, Kerry Warner, the continental champion for the U.S., helping to lead the front row of high-profile box office names here that should be among the riders to compete for the podium. Defending champion from Belgium here. And Ellen in cyclocross, starting from the front, so critical. You have less bodies to pass on the course, and when the pace is so high from the gun and you get that single file racing, it's so difficult to come from the back. So to be up here where you can, even if you don't get the whole shot around the first corner, at least to be among the leaders early on without having to use too much energy makes a big difference, right?
Absolutely, yeah. First or sometimes even second row can be just as advantageous. But yeah, you really have your work cut out for you to pull together a good result from further back. And it's not to say it's not possible, it's just that your day is going to be a lot easier if you can start towards the front. Last little final adjustments from everyone. You can see them fiddling with their glasses, their gloves, their legs.
And now inside of 1 minute before the start of this race, as the rain continues to come down, not heavily. It's been very windy today as well. And the weather's been back and forth, a mixed bag over the last few days. We had torrential rain on Thursday, dry on Friday and Saturday, rain showers this morning. Wind started to dry out the course over the last few hours, and now a light rain falling as this race commences with temperatures right around 70 degrees. The first of 16 races on the World Cup this season. And we get set to roll from Waterloo. Always a furious start on this paved section that goes slightly uphill to a right-hand turn.
Wisconsin, as they are full speed around turn number 1 during this moment.
Each lap will take about 7 minutes or so around what is a 3-kilometer course. The race overall will last about an hour in length. We'll know after the first 2 or 3 laps how many laps they will do in total. That'll be determined by the first few lap times as they try to time it to eventually get to that 1 hour length.
You can see just around this corner just how critical a front row start is. Michael Van Tornhout has basically no competition going around the corner, and by the time you get to mid-pack, it's 5 or 6 across, just elbows out.
Michael Van Tornhout, one of the 13 Belgians in the field, leading the way. Still a big group at the front, but many times, even on lap number 1, you will see just a few riders going clear. Sometimes one rider who gets a big gap and a huge margin on the rest of the field. But to be able to sort of like bust it open early on and not have to worry about the variables of mechanicals and other issues with a big group later on in the race, it can be a huge advantage if you can whittle down the field early in the event.
Although the wind is starting to pick up, you can see just the trees behind the riders. Things are starting to get windy, and who knows if this race is going to become more tactical as a result.
Onto the pavement just ever so briefly before the first significant hill, and the riders dismounting here and running up. We've seen just a select few over the years who have been able to ride this section. Most will run it here today. Ellen, given the weather and everything I laid out over the last few days and where the conditions stand right now, what type of impact do you think that'll have on the race?
I think that things are going to stay pretty consistent with what we saw, what we would kind of expect of an event like this, even with kind of the tacky corners and maybe a little bit of precipitation. Unless things start to become really slippery, I don't think that we're going to see a big impact on the field. I think that we'll see some group racing at the front.
Quentin Hermans at the very front in the green, white, and blue. Michael Van Tornhout right behind in the red and black. Tire pressure in this discipline and a day like today is also pretty critical as well, isn't it?
It's absolutely huge, especially for a sport like cyclocross. We don't have suspension, so look, someone riding the stairs. Yeah, we don't have suspension, so our tire pressure is our suspension, and it's the way that our bikes interact with the course. So it's going to be huge, and every rider here is probably running their tire pressure dial to even half a PSI.
This is the section where they will sort of tripod, get one foot on clip for balance there as they come down the off-camber section. What do you think is the optimum in terms of tire pressure that you like to go for?
It's super personalized to body weight. So I can say, like, for me, on a course like this, I'd probably be running anywhere between 20 and 22 PSI, just because there's some rocks and a couple of corners and ruts that are really challenging and you don't want to flat on. But, as soon as you start to go up in weight, you have to go up a ton in tire pressure as well. So it's not really a great general point.
Well, this is a 3-kilometer course, and they first held this event back in 2017. This is the 4th edition, and they really haven't changed it since the most recent edition 2 years ago in 2019. Many of the features the same in terms of the length, everything about the course, starting with the grassy technical section. We saw the Trek Factory Hill that they had to run up earlier, the log stairs. We've got some technical corners and some woods on the backside as well, and then a 180-degree turn right at the end of each lap that leads them back onto the pavement where the start-finish line is. This is the venue that is right behind the Trek Factory World Headquarters. The World HQ of the Trek Bike Company right here, and they are the host of this event and have been a wonderful host over the years. And they essentially took this piece of property a few years ago and said, hey, let's create a world-class cyclocross course. We've got the woods, we've got the land. Let's break it down and make it a challenging course, which is what they've done. They refined it a few times over the first couple of years, but from the last edition of this race to this year, pretty much left it unchanged because it's a good course for racing.
It's incredible, and what they've been able to do with this piece of land, the land is not very big. What we're riding on here is not that big, and not compared to what we're used to usually racing World Cups on. And I think it makes for even better racing because everything's so tight. It's amazing spectating. So yeah, it's really cool to see.
Yeah, it makes it easy for the spectators to get around and see multiple sections of the course from one spot. They even have a secret bar, as they call it, on the backside in the woods, but you're never going to find a bar at a bike race that's a secret. That secret gets around pretty quickly.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it is Quinten Hermans still number 11 at the front. Michael van Tornhout in second place. This is still the first lap, as we wait to find out how many laps they'll do in total. Going underneath one of the flyovers they have here on the backside of the course, and not too far away from the start of lap number 2. And just a few seconds separating, it looks like, the top 10 at this rate.
It's a very tight race, as you can see. There's 10 or 15 people on any given straight section, which is going to mean that everyone has to stay super on, or else you'll get passed by a few people at a time.
Right now, 6 Belgians in the top 10, so over half of the first 10 places occupied by one of the most potent nations in the sport. 13 Belgians in the field, and 6 of those riding near the front. Leaders going over that last flyover, and just a corner away from getting back to the start-finish line for the start of lap number 2. As we see the others riding through here, single file. So 1 lap in the books at just over 7 minutes total. 3K down, and the margin for our front 2 is just going to be a handful of seconds here. Tonerts, Corn Van Kessel, Lars van der Haar rounding out the top 5, and then Dan Sota, 9 seconds down in 6th place. Sota won an event here on this course on Friday, the Elite Men's C2 race, part of the Trek Cup. He basically won that by dropping everybody else at the end of the first lap to win by 39 seconds.
I'm sure everyone would like to be able to do that during this race as well. Just drop everyone during the first lap and never look back.
Probably going to be a little more difficult considering the depth and quality of this field. And I would say if there was a Mathieu van der Poel or a Wout van Aert here, maybe it would be more likely, but I think it's still a big question mark if any of these riders could go solo for the distance. But Quinten Hermans, Michael van Tornhout, seeing what they can manage here as they start to open things up.
We're going to try.
Double down. We know we don't want him to come back.
This is a pretty sizable gap that they're opening up. As we saw in the women's race, it seems like gaps open and close on this course all the time, but this is a pretty impressive lead that Quinten and Michael have just going into the second lap.
Yeah, Tonerts is the next rider on the course in 3rd place. The winner here from 2018 is Quinten Hermans hits the deck.
Looks like he didn't lose too much time, but hopefully he's not too shaken. This section, of course,
another rider.
A lot of damage during the warm-up as well, and as it gets wet, I think it's only going to continue to get worse.
Well, with the rain falling after dry conditions each of the last 2 days, you see the way they come down off that off-camber section as another rider goes down as well. They're carrying speed. It's an off-camber section to begin with, leading into a slight turn, which kind of makes it, unfortunately, the perfect recipe for a crash in wet weather.
It is, and then riders see a crash happening in front of them and they hit their brakes, and unfortunately I think it just causes more pile-ups. I think that this is going to be an issue throughout the rest of the race.
Oh, look at this. There were a rider who crashed. Still haven't been able to identify who that is, but still down. The bike is laying there. We saw another rider with a mechanical issue. I believe that was Quinten Hermans who was trying to adjust his bike.
It looks like Michael van Tornhout has been able to kind of take advantage of that little mistake and is really riding away with this now.
So van Tornhout, who was with Quinten Hermans at the front, Hermans going down in that crash on the wet pavement, now leaving van Tornhout out front by himself with a gap to everybody else.
it's so unfortunate for Quentin and the other riders that go down, because even though we didn't lose that much time in the crash, sometimes it can just shake your confidence, or it can mess up your bike just a little bit, and it's just really hard to predict kind of the impact of something like that.
That's a replay of Hermans and that crash, and given the fact that the rain is still falling and it's rather steady at the moment, that spot on this course is going to continue to be an issue. It's not going to dry up, it's only going to get wetter, and given the fact that all of these riders know that others have crashed, it's got to be in the back of their minds now.
Absolutely, yeah, and hopefully that'll help them, you know, kind of slow down and mitigate damage, but it can also make riders really stiff going through that section and can cause more carnage in the future. Saw a couple people go down during warm-up and was hoping that it would continue to dry up, but I think this rain has made that corner really dangerous.
And the tough thing too is they're coming downhill right before it, so you're going to be carrying speed, and to some extent there's not going to be a lot you can do about it. You see that rider there who really hit the barriers hard.
Fidea rider. Sorry, Balois Lions.
And now it seems like the rain is picking up even more.
I can feel it coming into the booth. It's windy and rainy here.
Yeah, we're still in for a little bit of rain.
So the wind picking up, as well as the rain as Van Tornhout goes down.
This race is very quickly turning into a race of attrition. It's going to be who makes the fewest mistakes with this changing course.
And that is Eli Eisenbeatz of Belgium now in the white jersey, who's come up to the back of Van Tornhout as he gets back on his bike after crashing in that muddy, grassy section. Well, that's a good indication of just how difficult this entire course is going to be in the rain. That was a flat section, and even though it was around a turn, certainly not the most difficult section of this course. So hang on now at this point.
Yeah, I think that mistake from Van Tornhout really speaks to the unpredictability of what's going on here, because yeah, I think that this course is going to continue to change, but Eli won here in the absolute torrential downpour in 2019, so I think that he's probably hoping for the skies to open up, because I think that'll really suit him.
Yeah, the rain right now as heavy as it has been all day. And you have Eisenbeatz and Van Tornhout at the front, waiting for the next group, third place and beyond, to come through here. Looks like Dan Sota of Belgium, number 12 in third place right now. Look at the trees. You can see how the wind is kind of gusting out there. The banner's even blowing. And about 10 seconds from these two out front to the next group chasing here on lap number 2.
Van Tornhout together, they got a 9-second gap.
So, given this rain and the way this course lays out and some of the carnage we've already seen, how is that going to impact things and also strategy the rest of the way?
Yeah, I think the strategy is such an interesting part, because, you know, I don't know how the course is riding, but seeing, you know, obviously a couple of crashes already makes me think that it's getting pretty slippery, but it doesn't look like the bikes are picking up a ton of mud, but once things start to get muddy, that can really change the strategy. But I'll be curious if some of these riders start pitting for different tires. It looks like they have decent traction right now, but I think that's going to be a really big factor. Looks like a rider's leaving for medical.
Eisenbeatz came over to the U.S. early, raced a super prestige race last weekend, finished on the podium, now leading in this first World Cup race of the season. As you see a rider there into the barriers on the side, over the top of the fencing. Oh, and now Eisenbeatz is off his bike there on that little uphill right-hand turn. They're going over this flyover, and then it's the start of lap number 3.
Looks like Eisenbeatz may have had a little bit of a gap before that issue as well, given that Van Tornhout was just passing him as he was getting back on his bike.
You go around the corner, and this one was putting a lot of
needs to hopefully maybe grab some new tires, and we'll feel much better. He's talking to his mechanic, so it looks like that's the plan.
Together, looking back, they can see Vanderhaar right there.
All right, 2 laps down. just inside of 15 minutes into this race. So what would you do at this point? Are you going to change bikes, new tires? How does the mechanical aspect of this race change?
So it really depends on the strategy that these riders put forward with their mechanics prior to the event. I think with the risk of rain, probably all of them have kind of like a signal, and they'll either know that they can grab a bike immediately that already has mud tires, or the mechanics are frantically putting the mud tires on the bikes right now. But I think at this point, with how many mistakes people are making, it's going to be beneficial to put on at least like a light mud tire, so maybe like a Baby Lemus or a Super Mud. It looks like they're both going into the pit to get new tires. I think that's going to even things out a little bit.
Quick bike change for both of the two leaders, Eisenbeatz and Van Tornhout.
And these two are teammates, so that's actually a lot of pressure to put on the pits at once, is to have two riders come through at the same time that are getting service from the same team.
And that is Ryan Kamp of the Netherlands, also number 4, getting a bike change as well. Watch out for those flyovers too, those are wet. This is classic cyclocross conditions, wet, muddy, windy.
Wow. This course is getting slippery, and it's getting slippery fast.
But the pace still very high at the front.
All right, let's see if they can navigate this corner safely this lap.
This is where those crashes occurred earlier, including Quinton Hermans, who was leading at the time. He's now dropped back. Gingerly working their way around that corner, and then the run-up.
That corner is so tricky because it's wet, and you need to make a pretty quick turn before you go into that metal gate. And yeah, I think it's hard in the dry, and then in the wet, it just makes it so much more complicated.
It's Pim Ronhaar of the Netherlands, number 3 there. Just get off his bike for a moment. And back to the two leaders. Eisenbeatz looking extremely strong here. Van Tornhout hasn't come through at all. He's sitting in second place. Eisenbeatz already has 3 podiums at the C2 level from back in Europe in the early portion of this campaign, and now going for his biggest results so far, trying to win the World Cup opener in Waterloo, Wisconsin, and kick off the season and the North American swing with a victory.
Saw kind of shaping up in the women's race. There's a pretty heated battle for 3rd and 4th with someone in 5th dangling off the back, and I'll be curious to see if these riders can catch up with the lead group, but at the moment it doesn't look like it. I think this race is more spread out than the women's was.
Well, barring crashes that can certainly shake up the classification here, are these two in a position now to ride out this race? I mean, is anybody going to catch him?
You know, I think looking at the start list, wow.
There's a crash there with Dan Sota, and that's a big name. Number 12, the rider who won the C2 race here on this course Friday.
Yeah, and I think honestly Dan's unfortunate crash is kind of a good reminder of your question, where it's like, you know, I think in a race like this, anything can happen. I don't know if there's a rider that's so much of a diesel that it feels like they could come back necessarily, but it's hard to count anyone out, and it's really hard to say that, you know, nothing could happen to either of these. Not that you would ever wish misfortune to them, but this race just keeps getting more and more unpredictable.
Well, Ellen, the question really seems to be, how much of a risk do you want to take to try and catch those leaders? How much do you want to risk losing a potentially top 3, top 5, top 10 by trying to go for the win?
Well, you know, as we say in racing, you have to be willing to lose the race to win it. So I think that that's one thing, is everyone's willing to put the race on the line, I think, for the most part, in order to get that coveted win. But I also think at this point, you really just have to ride your own race. These conditions, ever-changing, have made it a much more personal ride of just doing your absolute best and hardest effort. So you can't really be worrying about what's going on in front or behind you. You just have to be going all in.
Well, if you're an Eisenbeatz or Van Tornhout at this rate, knowing you have a decent-sized gap, not humongous, but it's fairly sizable, are you thinking about trying to bury the rest of the field and ride away now, or because of the delicate conditions, just trying to maintain your position?
Yeah, I think they're not quite at a point where they can really like mail it in per se, but I would say that, you know, you also don't want to be making any mistakes. So I think that they know that as they're riding right now in this sort of in-between of not all out, but still going very, very hard, they're able to get a small gap. So I think it's going to be more of a slow and steady wins the race here, and they're going to continue to ride away from the field.
Eisenbeatz will turn 24 years of age later on this month, trying to defend his title from here 2 years ago after last race was canceled a year ago because of the pandemic, and trying to become one of the few Belgians not named Wout van Aert to win. Status quo at the front on lap 3 of 9, over 20 minutes into what should be about a 1-hour race. At the end of that second lap, they figured out the timing to get to that 1-hour mark, so they decided 9 laps altogether. So still in the first half of this race. A lot more can happen with the wind and the rain and the difficult conditions they are experiencing.
Looks like these two are having a lot better luck now that they've pitted for new tires, or you know what I would assume would be new tires when they went into the pit. Seems like a lot fewer mistakes are happening, which is good to see. This hill's becoming very hard to ride.
And you see all the features on this course, Ellen. How does this particular track in Waterloo compare to some of the others that they ride throughout the year on the World Cup?
Yeah, I think that this course is very unique in the sense that it's hard to emulate a European World Cup course here in the US, but I think also it's really kind of special to have such a technical course here. I think, like, you know, Cross Vegas was so unique, and so it was a spectacle on its own, but it never really compared to what we had in Europe, whereas this track is challenging and it's on its own, and so I think like that's really cool. Having some big features, some really steep run-ups, big stairs, barriers, all of that kind of does compare to Europe, but I think it's sort of comparing apples to oranges just because of the soil type and you know, the venues that we have here.
Well, there's Quentin Hermans in the green, white, and the blue there. And as they come to the end of lap number 3, we'll see how far back he is. Going to be around 20 seconds. He was leading on lap number 1, was looking very good before he crashed on the pavement right behind the Trek headquarters, leading into the Trek Factory Hill, and that's what's cost him some time here. Hermans trying to regain as much time as possible. He was just outside the top 5 and 6th place in the 2019 edition of this race. That was won by the man who's currently leading once again in the white, number 7, Elie Eisenbeatz of Belgium, with number 9, Michael van Tornhout, his fellow Belgian, sitting in 2nd place. Quentin Hermans followed by Ryan Kamp of the Netherlands. How much does it matter to have your teammate alongside here? Even though you're both racing for the win, how much does it matter that you're both there on the same team from the same nation?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think, you know, it really depends on, you know, I think some teams have more tactics than others, but I think really the benefit here is that hopefully these two have a good rapport, so they're not going to be doing anything, they're not going to be doing any like dirty moves to each other, and I think like that alone is, it's just so much more productive than trying to chop someone or rub elbows. So I don't know if they have any team tactics or if there will be any payoff for one another for the win, but I do think that like these two know each other and they train together, so they sort of know each other's goals and what they need to be, where they need to be leading and where not to be leading. So I think like just that sort of open communication is going to be really advantageous.
And Hermans, number 11 there, makes it through that section where he crashed earlier. Now we swing back to the front on lap number 4. Eisenbeatz, then Tornhout, and then a pretty good gap to the others. 24 seconds to third place, which is Lars van der Haar and Ryan Kamp. Quinten Hermans in 5th out on the course. Tornhout's outside the top 10 right now. He's down in 11th and almost a minute back. Surprising, given the quality of rider that he is. He was the bronze medalist at the World Championships last year. In fact, he's been the bronze medalist at each of the last 3 World Championships, and trying to win the World Cup overall season series for the 3rd time here this season. Trying to become the 4th man ever to do that.
Whenever a rider drops back so far, especially with consistent lap times, you have to wonder if something may have happened that's caused them, like what happened to Denise Betsma in the women's race. Maybe something's held him up on course. I'll be curious to see how this lap time compares to the others.
Yeah, that's the nature of the way this sport is able to be covered, because so much is happening at the same time all over the course. You can only see so much, and sometimes if there's a mechanical or a rider getting caught in traffic or crash, whatever the case may be, sometimes you may not realize that. You just see the results reflected in their times.
Exactly. The lap time sometimes can tell an entirely different story.
Lap time's pretty good for our front 2, led by Eisenbeatz here. He's been leading the last couple of laps.
This is a really impressive ride from Quinten Hermans. Like he hit the ground and slid for quite a while, so it's really impressive that he was able to get back up and continue to ride with vigor, because sometimes it can just really psych you out, especially to hit the asphalt like that.
Yeah, it just shakes you up.
It does.
You know, and then you come back through that section later on, and you're obviously thinking about it, trying to manage it.
Well, and it hurts. You're probably in pain. Yeah,
that too.
The minor detail, but it looks like Ely really wants to be on the front, and I think that Michael Tornhout is kind of just along for the ride. I don't know if that speaks to their fitness or their feelings today, but that's definitely been seeming to be their strategy for all 4 laps so far.
And you wonder for Van Tornhout, is he just biding his time? Or is this an indication that Eisenbeatz really is the stronger of the 2 riders?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting the sense, and this is just based on the gap that I'm seeing opening up here, that maybe Van Tornhout is seeing that Ely is clearly a good wheel to follow and wants to stay there as long as he can, but it doesn't seem like he's quite there with Ely, but maybe I'm wrong. That's how we felt about Voss as well, and she ended up surprising us with the win. So.
Ariana Voss winning the women's race earlier today. Didn't lead much during the race itself, just kind of stayed there with the front group, and then won the sprints at the end, right near the finish line.
Another interesting detail with this race is that the lap times, or sorry, the lap count was actually set based on a really fast first lap that we were seeing, in the 7 minutes. And now these laps are getting closer to 8 minutes long. So this race is actually going to go for longer than an hour, most likely, and that can actually change the strategy, because people's training can be so fine-tuned, for 60 minutes. So it's going to be really interesting if this race goes longer, because it's going to go a little bit out of some riders' comfort zones.
How do they dial it in so precisely to be ready for a 1-hour race? What's the training like to get it that pinpoint?
Some people may not pinpoint it. Like I try to, sort of overtrain for an effort, but a lot of people are they just do a lot of 1-hour races, and that alone is going to be pretty specific training. So it's going to be hard if you have to do an extra lap when you were really only planning on doing a 60-minute effort. especially if the course continues to get slower. If if they go past 8-minute laps, if it gets really torn up, then they could be in for quite a surprise.
Well, what's interesting is they decided the lap count after the first 2 laps. They had timed those. Sometimes they go 3 laps deep or so before they decide the final number of laps.
Yeah, and the first 2 laps were pretty quick, at least for our leaders.
Right.
So it's, basing it off of the 2 fastest riders' first 2 laps with inclement weather like this is definitely, it could make for a very long day for the mid-pack riders that don't get lapped.
Rain still coming down, steady but not all that strong. This is the end of lap number 4, 12K into the race, and you see the flick of the elbow by Eisenbeatz. He wanted Van Tornhout to come through and take a pull for the first time. Now this is 3rd and 4th. Quinten Hermans and Pim Ronhaar. Quinten Hermans, number 11, who was the leader early on lap 1, crashed on the pavement that was wet on the backside of this course. It's cost him some time, and now starts his next lap at over 20 seconds down.
Ryan Camp coming through again, former U23 world champion and silver medalist just last year. Cam wanted not today. He's watching him because he's one for the future.
Now we saw the leader, Eisenbeatz, give that flick of the elbow for Van Tornhout to rotate through. With the dynamic that has developed in this race, is there any reason that he has to come through? Is it incumbent upon him to take a pull at the front there? Or is it more just the sportsmanship aspect of it?
Yeah, I wonder if it has to do with them being teammates and if maybe there is like a little bit of an understanding here. I've noticed that definitely if Michael wanted to be leading, he could have on several corners that he's taken a little bit differently than Ely. So it feels like they sort of had an agreement that Ely would be on the front, or maybe not an agreement, but like an understanding. And then once the elbow flick happened, it felt like he came through pretty readily. So I think that, I think that they're just being good teammates, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see because it seems so agreeable right now. But we'll see what happens on the final lap.
For now, until it's not.
Yes.
And again, this is the area where so many crashed earlier, that pavement. The 2 leaders made it through all right. Now here comes Quinten Hermans along with Pim Ronhaar. Hermans in that green helmet. He crashed here on lap 1 in the rain, but he's made it through unscathed the last few times.
Chris White, Stephen Hyde coming through 24th, 25th place.
So Van Tornhout here on lap number 5, leading for the first time.
5 seconds fastest lap time.
Van Tornhout was on the podium in the last edition of this race back in 2019. He was 3rd. The man who's just in front of Eisenbeatz was the winner, and Tornhout was between the 2 in 2nd place. Whoa.
Wow.
Whoa, just avoids that stake in the ground there, and now up against the barrier.
That was a very, very good save from Van Tornhout because that could have gone very bad.
Another look. Woo. Well, he was trying to get in that groove there and just carried so much speed that he kind of missed the turn, overcooked it. And now as a result, Eisenbeatz is now back to the front. Eli Eisenbeatz, the U23 world champion 3 years ago, a year before he won this event on the World Cup. 4 elite World Cup wins to his name to go along with his 9 under-23 World Cup wins.
It looks like Eli may have been able to take advantage just a little bit of that mistake from Van Tornhout, but feels like these two have really just been magnetized to each other for this whole race so far.
Eisenbeatz, quite the champion. If you combine his under-23 results with his senior World Cup results, 16 victories altogether for the soon-to-be 24-year-old. Trying to make it back-to-back wins in Waterloo, Wisconsin. And a victory to jumpstart the new World Cup season. This is the first of 16 races over the next few months. First of 3 in North America. They will have a midweek event in Fayetteville, Arkansas as a preview of the upcoming World Championships. And Eisenbeatz is going into the pits here for another new bike.
Whether to pit or not is always an interesting strategy that I think a lot of people take very differently. So probably Eisenbeatz, unless he's having an issue, is getting a bike that has a cleaner drivetrain, so it's going to roll smoother and pedal more efficiently, like a little bit cleaner. But obviously you lose a little bit of time in the pit, but then it's really about whether or not the time you gain back is exponential. And it looks like that time that he lost was worth it because he seems to be riding very well now.
Yeah, and it's really about the state of the race when you pit as well, too, because he just had Tornhout with him, a big gap to the others. If he had been in a huge group and had to pit, that would have been a different story, right?
Yeah, it is, because sometimes if you're on the front and you go into the pit, you do lose a little bit of time, and then you're immediately, sort of dropped to the back of the group, and that can be just a royal pain. But also, I think it's really good for Eli to pit right now because the racing is just starting to heat up. So now he has a fresh bike and doesn't have to worry about pitting, immediately after he attacks if he were to get a big gap or something like that. So it kind of feels like he may have gotten that fresh bike out of the way. And it's not to say he won't pit again, but it's definitely nice to, like I said, just get a fresh bike and then see where things end up.
Just crossing the midpoint of this race, the season opener from Waterloo, Wisconsin. And it is Eli Eisenbeatz, the defending champion, in the lead, ahead of his fellow Belgian, Michael van Tornhout, who is trying to win here for the first time. Eisenbeatz has done well in North America over the years, not just winning here in Wisconsin, but also in Iowa City, where these riders will compete 1 week from today. They have the unusual calendar of 3 races in a week's time, with the Wednesday race down in Northwest Arkansas coming up in just a few days. A first ever World Cup stop, because it will also serve as a preview of the first ever World Championships to be held at that venue. First 3 events of the World Cup season being held in the U.S. before they then quickly head back to Europe for the next few months. But unlike in previous years where these U.S. stops were back in September, they've been postponed by a month, and the season getting going here in early October in 2021. End of lap 5 coming up.
Down into the carpet.
Now just over halfway through it, unless they have a mechanical or they crash. Hard to see anyone catching these two the way they're riding.
Absolutely, and based on the lap times, it looks like Quentin Ermans is kind of out there on his own at the moment in no man's land, but it looks like he's salvaging a pretty great race after that early incident.
There is Quentin Ermans there in 3rd place. And cutting into the deficit somewhat. I think it was over 20 seconds back a while ago, now 17 seconds down. But has to be frustrated given the fact that he's got good form, was leading this race in the first lap before crashing on the wet pavement. And that shuttled him back, and now he's in 3rd. And with some work to do to get back up to the leaders here. But for now, he's still in a podium spot. Lap number 6 of 9. Van Tornhout glued to the back wheels of Eisenbeatz.
Looks like Eli might be testing the waters a little bit. This might just be how he rides, but it seems very possible as well that he's kind of been attacking a little bit on a few sections to see if he might be able to drop him and get away with a little less effort.
Tornhout having a little more difficulty. Remember, he had that issue on the downhill off-camber section on the last lap.
It's hard for these riders who may be switching to mud tires. They don't know the exact tire pressure that they'll want to run necessarily based on these conditions if they haven't been pre-riding in the mud. So sometimes it can be more of an educated guess than anything, and maybe he had to guess on his tire pressure and it didn't pan out quite as well as it is for Eisenbeatz.
Now 40 minutes deep. Quinton Herman's in third place, coming through the section where he crashed on lap number 1. A solo third at the moment. And not much of a gap, but larger than what we saw earlier between the front two of Eisenbeatz and Van Tornhout.
No, this is not a team sport. Wholly a team sport.
Now Eisenbeatz just steady and strong here. Over the log stairs. Now he's got the fitness, he's got the form and the strength, but also the bike handling skills. Very good for this 23-year-old. Demonstrated right there. And this is where Michael Van Tornhout there in the black and red had issues on the last lap. Just barely stayed on his bike. This is the 4th year they have held this World Cup in Waterloo, Wisconsin, which is about 26 miles northeast of Madison, the capital of Wisconsin, and about a 1-hour drive west of Milwaukee. From here, it's about 700 miles to Fayetteville, Arkansas, just about an 11-hour drive that they will make either tonight or tomorrow before the race on Wednesday. And then another rather lengthy haul back north to Iowa City for next Sunday's race.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Ellen, how does that change the dynamic when you're used to racing every weekend, and then you all of a sudden throw in the driving and a midweek race the way they have this week to start the season?
Yeah, it's tough. I think like the Americans are a little bit more tuned to it just because we have such a we live in such a spread out country that we're a little bit more used to the travel, but I think for a lot of the Europeans, you know, traveling 11 hours is more than they had to do to get to Worlds in Denmark. So this is a really big week for them, and so I think like it's kind of, I always really appreciate like the Europeans who do come over here because they kind of understand what the Americans go through when they get to Europe, and so I think it's like kind of a nice, it evens the playing field a little bit, but it's exhausting for all of the riders, and so I think that you know, it especially relies on the staff a lot to like really pick up the slack where things don't where like the travel just gets harder. Yeah. And so yeah, I think that it creates a really interesting dynamic and maybe a little bit more strategy with what races you focus on.
Easy to beat flying here on this flat section of some tight technical corners. The rain letting up somewhat at this point, and still a breeze out on the course. It was gustier earlier than it seems to be now. And Eisenbeatz seems to be trying to elevate the tempo. About a 4-second gap between him and Van Tornhout now. Michael Van Tornhout, the 27-year-old under 23 world champion from 6 years ago. 2-time silver medalist at the under 23 level at the Worlds as well. Won silver at the European Championships last year for the men's elite competition. But trying to win here in Waterloo for the first time. And trying to hunt down the man who won the last edition. Eisenbeatz, his fellow Belgian. Bunny hop in the barriers. This is pretty much settled into a fixed dynamic when you look at the big picture of this race. From what we saw early on with the big group on lap 1, we saw the crashes, which kind of changed things at the front, including taking down the leader at the time, Quinten Hermans. So the crashes happened, there was a shuffling of the field. Eisenbeatz came to the front with Van Tornhout. Quinten Hermans lost a little time, but now he's settled into 3rd place in solo fashion. And these two have maintained their positions at the front. Eisenbeatz followed by Van Tornhout. And on the Trek Factory Hill here, where they have the switchbacks going down and then riding back up, it's Eisenbeatz who's extending his lead now to about 8 seconds.
This is a really great, I guess you could call it an attack, although it doesn't seem like it happened at any given moment, but it seems like Ely's really starting to pull away from Van Tornhout. But I think now it comes down to a little bit of strategy for Van Tornhout, because he is kind of equidistant between Ely and Quinten, so he doesn't want to go too easy and be caught by Quinten, but he also doesn't want to go so hard to catch Ely that he ends up making a mistake and completely loses the podium altogether.
Therein lies the quandary as they come to the end of lap number 6. Eisenbeatz just shy of 46 minutes on the bike, 3 laps left to go. Van Tornhout now with his largest deficit of 11 seconds. They'll make it 12 officially as the clock stops. And Quinten Hermans finds himself 21 seconds back of the leader. Well, with Pim Ronhaar coming across for 4th place here, over half a minute down. Eisenbeatz ventures further into the second half of this race with the largest lead that he's enjoyed. The 2-time under-23 world champion and defending champion of this race is in a good spot here and still looking very robust out there on the bike. And for Van Tornhout, you're right, Ellen, the calculus becomes, how much do I want to risk to try and stay out front with Eisenbeatz as he comes through the pit now, versus just trying to manage my 2nd place and get that 2nd spot on the podium and not risk losing it to Quinten Hermans.
Absolutely, and I think seeing Van Tornhout pitting right then maybe indicates that, you know, hopefully he has some faster laps to come, but also it's a good indicator of why it's important to pit earlier than later, because he has Quinten Hermans breathing right down his neck.
Not too dissimilar to what we saw in the women's race, where we saw Denise Benzema leading early before she had a mechanical issue. She dropped back, eventually caught up to finish in 3rd and on the podium. And then here in the men's race, we have Quinten Hermans leading on lap 1. He crashes, loses a little time, but now also back in that 3rd position on the course.
Absolutely. Sometimes when you feel good, and there's no stopping that train. And it's great to see Quinten do such consistent and fast laps. And I think, you know, we still have, 2.5 laps to go. These races are long, so I'm really curious to see how it plays out.
Down 2 PSI in the front, down 1 PSI in the back. They know exactly what they started with on their bikes.
Quinten Hermans has never been on the podium here in Waterloo, Wisconsin, so this would be a first for him. Van Tornhout has the 1 podium from the last edition in 2019 when he was 3rd. And Eli Eisenbeatz trying to win for the 2nd time in a row.
I have to say I'm rooting for Quinten to pull off this podium, because he's been 4th twice already this year, so I'd love to see him get on this podium.
All right, now he's in a good position because he's 3rd solo. Eisenbeatz, see how far he extends that right leg for the balance and the positioning on that off-camber downhill section there. Back to Van Tornhout, who's in 2nd. No, and Van Tornhout once again going way to the left. He had that issue a couple of laps ago. So that has not been easy for him. A tricky spot for the Belgian rider. He's remained on his bike and upright each time, but it's been close. always focus on the speed in some of these races, and it's easy to do when you see a Van der Poel or a Wout van Aert who blasts to the front on the opening lap and just stays there riding an individual time trial, blowing everybody out of the water. But it's a race like this with the mud, the rain, the wind, where you see how the bike handling skills come into play and are so important too, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's why like this course is you know, so well loved by so many, is that it's like one of the, you know, really good technical fun courses that we have in the US. And it's very, very common to have a lot of like very power-centric courses here, especially in America, but to have like a really good technical course that involves a lot of finesse and technique is really nice, and especially appreciated by riders like myself who, you know, spend a lot of time working on technical riding. So these courses are so fun to watch.
All three of the North American stops are compelling for different reasons and really provide a challenge for the world's best cyclocross riders. The first ever World Cup in the U.S. was back in 2015 in Las Vegas, when Cross Vegas was added to the World Cup calendar. Iowa City was next, and then Waterloo. And Iowa City this year will complete the triumvirate of the three U.S. stops a week from today, as Quinten Hermans gets a quick bike change. Eisenbeatz not slowing down. He recognizes the situation, his positioning. He's got the biggest gap he's had all day. Weather starting to turn in his favor somewhat, the rain letting up. It seems like the wind is dying down to a degree. Over 50 minutes in, so coming up on the final couple of laps. This is where he wants to be.
He's not letting up, but I think that sort of this effort that he's doing right now is keeping him engaged. Sometimes if you start going too easy, you can also start making mistakes, just like when you start going too hard. So I think he needs to keep the pressure on the pedals so that he can really stay engaged in the race and not make a silly mistake.
Quinten Hermans is cranking away here and working on reducing that deficit to Van Tornhout in second place. And for Michael Van Tornhout, the bad sign is his last few lap times have gotten slower. So he's getting slower while Eisenbeatz is still looking strong at the front. And the bigger concern now for Van Tornhout may not be that he won't catch Eisenbeatz for first place, but that he may get caught himself for second by Quinten Hermans. Has really not put a foot wrong. You know, his positioning and the way he's handled the bike, the corners, everything about the course has really been spot on today.
Yeah, I think once he was able to start riding his own race, he really came into his own and has just really started putting on a clinic at the front.
He's looked comfortable.
He has, yeah, very, very comfortable, very composed.
There's Quinten Hermans on the left-hand side of the screen. And the man right here in the top right-hand corner is Michael Van Tornhout, who's in second place. 2 laps left to go for the leader. His lead at the end of the previous lap was 12 seconds. After 21K of racing, what will it be now? That lead is going to grow for Eisenbeatz. Michael Van Tornhout now 25 seconds back, and Quinten Hermans is closing in on him. They're separated by just 4 seconds. So much tighter between second and third than it is between first and second. And that now Lars van der Haar, who's coming through next. And Eli Eisenbeatz really turning the screws now. Big acceleration at the front as he starts the first of the penultimate
Top
lap.
of the hill, he is leaving nothing out there now, as that was a big push up the hill. To try and distance himself.
That is really the acceleration for the win at this point with this kind of a gap. Then Tornhout going backwards instead of forward.
Cyclo-cross,
And Eisenbeatz in control at the moment. Back to the start-finish line, Jens Adams of Belgium.
Very tight racing inside the top 10. Even, yeah, just outside the top 5.
4 riders within a minute, and then everyone else over a minute and a half behind the leader. How about Toon Aerts in 7th place, over a minute and a half down. That's a big surprise given the fact that he won this race back in 2018, starting this year trying to become just the 4th rider to ever win the World Cup overall season series. But he spent a good portion of this race outside the top 10. He's in 7th now with 2 laps left to go, but nowhere close to this man who is the leader.
Ely's on a completely different part of the course than pretty much all of the other riders.
Well, the women's race certainly much closer, as we had 3 riders battling for the win all the way to the end of the final lap. But for a rider like Eisenbeatz, this is just the way he likes it. Gap growing with each and every lap out front, and it eliminates the variables and the things that could go wrong that can become more of a factor when you're in a group. If he has a mechanical issue, a crash, or something like that, he still has a margin to work with here.
Right, at this point he still has enough time to make a mistake and still stay in the lead, and that's really comforting for a rider. And I think it's also really comfortable for Michael Van Tornhout right now, who has been going backwards a little bit in this race, that the gap between 3rd and 4th, so the gap between on the podium and not, is over 30 seconds. So I think that that's also comforting for him, because although he hasn't really been able to stick onto Ely's wheel, I think that the possibility of him still staying on the podium is really high.
Yeah, whether it's 2nd or 3rd, the realization that you're likely going to land on the podium and it's not going to be a big group that's going to challenge from behind is reassuring.
Absolutely, yeah. The gap between 2nd and 3rd and the gap between 3rd and 4th in terms of emotional satisfaction can be big, because being just off the podium is always a painful place to be.
So Eisenbeatz, in terms of his lap times, have kind of bounced back and forth. It seems like over the last 3 laps, he's kind of let up somewhat. Still seems to be riding hard, or at least that's the way it looks with some of these accelerations. But when you factor in the actual math of the lap times, he's kind of dialed it back somewhat. Now the tightest and perhaps most exciting battle is going to come back here for 2nd place. Van Tornhout leading Quinten Hermans by just a few seconds in the race for 2nd place, as Eisenbeatz is back into the pit, and once again another bike change. Multiple changes for the front 3 riders in terms of new bikes throughout the course of this race. What's he looking for at this point in terms of a bike?
By pitting. Yeah, I think that he probably most likely just wants a clean drivetrain. I think right now it doesn't look like the bikes are picking up a ton of dirt, or a ton of mud, but they might be getting a little bit heavier, and he could be very particular about that. But I also kind of imagine that the drivetrains are just going to become really grindy, and that's always just an annoying feeling, and it also makes it more likely to have a mechanical. So I think keeping with a fresh bike just makes it a little less likely that you're going to end up with something preventable going wrong on your machine.
Eisenbeatz as we hit the 1 hour mark coming up shortly, is dominating here.
This is going to be a long day for a lot of the riders. With gaps like this and being almost an hour with 1 lap to go for the leader, this is going to be a big race for a lot of these guys.
Eisenbeatz about 2 weeks away from his 24th birthday, but such a prodigious young rider with several events at the elite level already. I mentioned he won this race 2 years ago in its most recent edition. He also won the Elite European Championships a year ago. And then you throw that in with everything he won at the under 23 level, multi-time world champion. A precocious, very talented young rider who's going to be competing with the best for quite a while if he continues at this rate. The question is, will he then take on a larger diet of road racing, where we've seen guys like Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert, who have been so exceptional in cyclocross over the years, do in recent years? And does that impact his cyclocross calendar? But for now, cementing his place as one of the best in the sport. All right, here's second and third. Michael van Tornhout in second place at the bottom of the screen on the left of the green helmet. That is Quinten Hermans. It doesn't look like Hermans is making up much ground in van Tornhout right now, as our leader, Eli Eisenbeatz, is going to come around this corner, and we'll get the bell for 1 lap left to go.
It looks like Quinten may have made up as much ground as he's capable of right now, especially given the effort he had to do after his crash. But I think now kind of the name of the game for him is just really staying on
Here in Waterloo.
in case Michael makes a mistake. If he's not physically able to close the gap anymore, he just needs to be ready to pounce if something goes wrong with Van Tornhout in the last lap.
28 seconds back for Van Tornhout to first place. Quinten Hermans is 5 seconds back of second. So just 5 seconds separating the last 2 steps of the podium. This man, Eisenbeatz, as he starts the final lap of the race, has his largest margin of the day. Over 1 hour in, and still looks fresh. Eisenbeatz trying to make it as boring as possible for his final lap, as 4th place belongs to Lars van der Haar, who's just over a minute down here. Lars van der Haar in that unenviable spot of being just off the podium places, but time-wise being well back of the podium.
And well up on 5th at Tornhout. He is 40 seconds up.
And his Tornhout's right there. He's top 5, but he's 142 back of that man. Aerts, to his credit, has made up time on other members of the field in the final few laps. Went from 11th to 5th. Has basically cut that deficit in half in terms of placings. Now, this is a guy who comes in expecting to challenge for the podium and the win, not top 5s. Aerts was second to Eisenbeatz in the last edition in 2019. Won the year before. In fact, beat Wout van Aert in that 2018 race.
I'm sure Tone will be pretty disappointed with having such bad luck, but I also think with 2 more World Cups in the next 7 days, I hope that he's able to see that form and the impact he was able to have on the last few laps, and have a little feather in his cap for some confidence going into the next 2 events.
All of the riders and staff will leave here from Waterloo, Wisconsin, either this evening or tomorrow. make what is about an 11-hour drive, covering 700 miles south to Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is in the Ozark Mountains of northwest Arkansas. They will race there on Wednesday afternoon and then drive north to Iowa City for the final of the 3 North American races a week from today. After that, it's back to Europe for the next few months, and then closing out the season back in Fayetteville on the same course they'll race on this Wednesday, where they will hold the World Championships in late January. What a fun weekend that should be. The second time the Cyclo-cross Worlds have ever come to the U.S. following Louisville back in 2013. And everyone excited about getting a look at that Fayetteville course. Everyone who's been there says it's terrific. They put a lot of resources into making it one of the best. And the World Cup on Wednesday will serve as a preview for what they'll see at the end of January.
So you can see Ely kind of taking sort of an alternative line on a lot of these sections. He's not riding in the middle of the track on the brown strip in the middle. He's kind of going wide on a lot of these to get a little bit more grass, which when it's muddy and wet like this, the grass has so much more grip than the mud does. So you can see him taking some kind of weird lines if you watch closely, and that's because he's trying to find traction wherever he can.
Eisenbeatz, who has already won 3 races this season at a lower level. Now going for his biggest win of the campaign so far in the World Cup season opener. This is a guy who has raced on the road before, not all that often, but a good climber. Won the mountains classification of a smaller race 6 years ago. He's been on the podium in others.
Last time Ely won this race, he also went on to win the World Cup in Iowa City. And the same goes for Tornhout. When he won here, he also won the race in Iowa City. So it seems like there's a little bit of winner's luck that comes with winning the opening round of the World Cup that can carry you through to the other American rounds. So I'm sure Ely will be hoping to repeat that luck going into the next 2 World Cups as well.
Yeah, typically these U.S. races over the last several years have marked the beginning of the World Cup season, but it's been a little different in that they've usually been held in mid-September as opposed to mid-October the way they're being held this year. And we're adding the Fayetteville race in between. So it was either starting in Iowa and making a short drive here to Waterloo, or vice versa, coming from here in Waterloo and making the short drive to Iowa City. This time you make a lengthy drive from Wisconsin to Arkansas, and then another pretty sizable haul up to Iowa.
I think it's really nice having these World Cups during this period of time, because it makes the sort of the fitness that you carry into these events a little bit more applicable later on. Oftentimes when we were racing in September, there was like this early season form that people could have, but it was really hard to perform really well at these World Cups and then also still race well into December. So carrying fitness through October into Worlds feels much more manageable.
And so many times it was so hot and humid, not only here in Wisconsin, but in Iowa as well in September. Weather cooler, a little wetter here in October.
Yeah, I think that this weather has been a much appreciated change from some of the heat that we've had, especially, here and in Iowa in years past.
And especially for the Europeans who really aren't used to the humidity at all. I mean, the American racers, they understand it, they've dealt with it before, but the Europeans don't really race in those sorts of hot and humid conditions.
Yeah, and I spoke to Ely before the start today, actually, and he had said the same thing, that it's been hard for them to have such kind of inconsistent weather. That was like the biggest issue. They didn't even struggle with jet lag so much as they have with the heat and the humidity. This is much more of what they're used to over in Belgium.
Well, it looks like the podium is set now. And here comes the winner. 2 weeks shy of his 24th birthday, the Belgian Eisenbeatz. Final first World Cup race of the new season. And the third straight World Cup win in the U.S. for Eisenbeatz as well, after winning in Iowa the last time over. Michael van Tornhout, who was third in the last edition here, will be second today. And third place will belong to Quinten Hermans, who was sixth last time in 2019. Led this race on the opening lap before a crash on wet pavement, but he still manages to recover and finish on the podium in third.
That's a great ride from Quinten to be able to salvage such a great result after such a hard crash.
And just missing out on the podium positions, Lars van der Haar. 105 down on the winner. Fourth place on the day. So a sizable gap from first to second, and then from the podium to fourth. And big margins to other riders here. Well over a minute and a half back, and how about a sprint for fifth place? And Van de Poel just ahead of Toon Aerts for fifth place. One Belgian beating out another. Valuable World Cup points at stake. It may look like a sprint for a win because it's so aggressive, but these are valuable points they'll carry throughout this 16-race season, and they all add up. Belgians in the top 12. Kerry Werner, the highest placed American, in 14th. 13 Belgians in the entire race. Dan Sota, who won the C2 race here on Friday, finishes in 12th at 2.5 down. And Werner, the highest placed American, still yet to come across the line, but running in 14th position. Should see him shortly. Not a bad showing for the Belgians. You bring a baker's dozen and they all finish near the top of the standings. And there is Werner officially coming across, just over 3 minutes down in 14th place, so a top 15. Top American on the day.
Eisenbeatz, de wereldbeker was een doel, dan begin je goed met een overwinning.
Ja, de eerste ronde had ik kettingprobleem en wist ik dat ik niet mocht panikeren, maar Michael reed ook heel sterk, we konden elkaar goed aflossen en ik zag Quinten toch iets dichter komen, dacht ik, om het tempo iets op te drijven en dan aanhouden tot aan de finish.
Wat gebeurde er met die ketting? Wat ging er mis?
Ja, voordat ik afsprong ging hij er al af en ik trapte door en hij zat tussen mijn kader, dus moest ik even stoppen. Maar ja, dat is een kwestie om niet te panikeren en toen zag ik dat Toon viel en Quinten viel, Michael viel ook, dus wist ik dat het een heel slippery wedstrijd ging worden, zeker omdat er al padjes gemaakt werden en met die regen was dat precies ijs.
Je bent hier, je gaat nu vertrekken naar Fayetteville, wanneer vertrek je?
Wij vliegen morgenmiddag naar daar. Dus ja, morgen eerst nog losrijden en dan op de vlieger naar Bentonville, denk ik. Dus dat is 2 uur vliegen, dus alles is wel goed geregeld van de ploeg ook.
Eisenbeatz, one question in English, of course. You win in Waterloo, that makes you happy, probably.
Yeah, very happy. I was a bit nervous before the race because of last weekend. I didn't have the great feeling, but when I started here, I immediately felt really good, and then it was good to have Michael in the beginning of the race. We know each other perfectly, so I'm happy to be 1-2 with the team.
Was it clear who was the best today, you or Michael?
I don't know. I think in the uphill I was a little bit better. Michael was technically better, so I think we rode through a very great race, and that's promising for the rest of the week.
Okay, enjoy the podium.
Well, Ellen, he has now won 3 straight U.S. races on the Cyclo-cross World Cup. 2 in Waterloo, 1 in Iowa City. Can he make it 4 in a row this Wednesday in Fayetteville on a new course in Arkansas for all of these riders? Michael van Tornhout, his friend and Belgian teammate, finishing in 2nd. And let's hear from him.
Michael van Tornhout, helemaal op blote voeten tot bij ons gekomen. Dank daarvoor, voor de snelheid waarmee je tot hier komt. De snelheid om Eisenbeatz te kloppen helemaal in de laatste ronden, dat zat er niet in vandaag?
Nee, ik voelde eigenlijk al van in het begin toen Quint gevallen was, dat het heel moeilijk was om alleen te rijden. En toen kwam Eli erbij en reed eigenlijk echt veel te snel voor mij. En ik denk dat Eli toch wel een ronde of 3, 4 op mij moeten wachten heeft. Maar dan op een gegeven moment kon ik eigenlijk niet anders dan hem laten rijden, want Quint kwam toch redelijk kort. En dan kwam ik eigenlijk terug een beetje in mijn ritme en vond ik de goede lijn een beetje en zo kon ik toch nog die tweede plaats nemen.
Al bij al tevreden over die tweede plaats?
Ja, toch wel. Ik denk dat je nooit niet weet hoe dat hier toekomt of hoe dat de conditie was goed, maar hoe dat je natuurlijk de jetlag verteert en zo. Dus ik ben content met die tweede plaats.
Wat een hectisch begin was dat van de wedstrijd.
Ja, ik dacht met de regen dat het parcours niet ging veel veranderen, maar het veranderde eigenlijk om elke bocht dat je verder kwam op parcours werd het altijd maar gladdiger en gladdiger. En toch moest je veranderen naar Rino's, dan terug naar een lager bandendruk. Dus het was hectiek wel. Ja.
Michael van Tornhout, 2nd in Waterloo. You can live with that?
Yeah, for sure. Eli was the strongest today, so second place was the highest place to get today. So yeah, I'm happy with that.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Well, Ellen, what really stuck out about this race for you the most?
I think it was really interesting to sort of watch how perseverance really impacted the race and sort of the riders that had issues or that seemed like even Michael van Tornhout that didn't seem like he was doing super well during the middle of the race. He ended up pulling together a really great result. Same thing for Quentin, same thing for Tone. There were so many riders that were kind of dealt a tough hand and were really, really able to persevere to get a great result. So that's always really inspiring and cool to see.
A lot of Belgians there in the top 10. And it is the first 3 separated by 43 seconds. Everyone else over a minute back. Tonertz just outside the top 5, a rider who will drive for his 3rd ever World Cup Series win here this season. But today's race belonging to Eisenbeatz, his fellow Belgian, as we take you back through the highlights, beginning with the start here. And several riders getting in the mix early. Quentin Hermans near the front in the green helmet. And taking the lead here on this first lap with Van Tornhout right behind him. And Quentin Hermans, who had finished in 6th place in the last edition of this race, was looking good here on this opening lap. And was hoping to get a gap with Van Tornhout, but it would be a crash that we'll see momentarily that would derail his chances. And this is where the rain really started and became such a factor with the wet pavement.
Oh, it's hard to watch that crash.
So Hermans the first to go down, and then others right behind him on this first lap. A hard crash into the barriers there.
Looks like Thibaut Nice, unfortunately, was involved in the crash.
And then you see other riders on the left-hand side of the screen going over the fencing, trying to handle the muddy, wet, sloppy conditions as the rain intensified about midway through. And then this would really kind of be the way the race would progress, with Eisenbeatz and Van Tornhout separating themselves after those crashes from the rest of the field. Once we got past all of that damage, it kind of became a two-man race for the next few laps out front. Quinten Hermans here back on his bike after the crash, leading the chase group, and then eventually Eisenbeatz would work to drop Van Tornhout and go out front alone.
For a while, it looked like Quinten Hermans was going to also catch Michael Van Tornhout, but I don't know if they ever made contact.
No, Quinten Hermans did well to drop the rest of the competitors for the podium and ride solo third the rest of the way. And it was Eisenbeatz who was trying to shake off Van Tornhout, and eventually he did just that to get a gap that would only grow over the course of the last few laps. Van Tornhout slowly losing time on the last 3 laps, and Eisenbeatz making it just a business-like ride the last few times around this course at the Trek World headquarters. And then he would celebrate his second consecutive win here. And Van Tornhout, who had a challenge from Hermans for second place. At one point, Quinten Hermans was within 5 seconds of this man, Van Tornhout, but he found another gear, pulled away, solo second, and Hermans safely comes in with the final spot on the podium in third. So that's the way this first of 16 races on the Cyclo-cross World Cup closes out the action today on what became a rainy day in Waterloo, Wisconsin.
Quinten Hermans, na dit soort wedstrijden mag je best tevreden zijn met een derde plaats, denk ik, want je hebt wat meegemaakt.
Ja, klopt. Of juist niet tevreden zijn en weten dat ik met een beetje pech zat. Ik ging natuurlijk wel heel rap die bocht in dat ik viel, maar ik had ook nog helemaal niet het gevoel gehad dat het schoof op parcours had. Dus dat was eigenlijk zo de eerste keer dat ik voelde dat echt schoof.
Je arm ziet er toch wel redelijk geschaafd uit. Erg veel last van?
Ja, tot de laatste toer viel het best wel mee eigenlijk. Ik liet juist met de kop een beetje hangen de tweede ronde, denk ik. En ik had ook een beetje stukken met mijn fiets. En omdat we maar 2 fietsen hier hebben, moest ik ook even wachten, omdat daar aan gewerkt moest worden om op grove banden te gaan. Dus daar verlies ik wel wat seconden, denk ik. Oké, ik denk dat Eli wel gaan vliegen was, maar ik denk dat Michael wel binnen handbereik was. En dan de laatste ronde liet ik een beetje met de kop hangen. En ja, toen had ik echt... toen begon alles een beetje op te staan in mijn lichaam, precies.
We're only at a certain moment only 8 seconds left, I think, between you and Michael, but the gap was too big.
Yeah, I crashed the second lap, and before my crash, I think I had one of the best feelings on the bike I ever had. I felt really strong and really good, and yeah, it was just with the crash. I never got that feeling from before the crash back, actually, and I felt strong on the bike, but not strong enough for the win.
Thanks.
So somewhat disappointing for Quinten Hermans, but he still manages the podium as he recovers from the crash on lap number 1. And the podium getting set to take place in front of this good crowd here, with the rain now letting up to an extent. And the top 3 poised to be presented to the fans in Waterloo. Now the women were fortunate to escape the rain earlier. The men got it right as the race began. Quinten Hermans, the man in the green, white, and blue, got the worst of it with that first lap crash. Well, just the way in the women's race we saw the Dutch sweep of the podium, we get a Belgian sweep in the men's events.
Ladies and gentlemen, Quinten Hermans of the Tornhout Circle Cyclo-cross team.
Now, Ellen, when you see the 3 riders on the podium here and the way this race unfolded today, does it give you any indication of what we might see in Fayetteville, or is it course dependent, weather dependent? Is it something where today's results might not have as much of an impact as you might think?
No, I think that today's results are a pretty good indicator of, you know, some sense of what we'll be seeing. I think that these guys, there's no such thing as a fluke good race. But I also think that a lot of people could have had some bad luck. I think there were a couple riders that showed that they were super strong today and just had some unfortunate circumstances. So I think maybe we could see more competition at the front in the next 2 events. But I think that these guys are going to be a staple for the rest of our time in the U.S.
Now we are greeting to the president of the matriarch of Trek Bikes, Laney Burke. Ladies and gentlemen,
Eisenbeatz. Just 2 weeks away from his 24th birthday and the winner of the season opener on the Cyclo-cross World Cup.
And now we call upon John Burke, president of Trek Bikes, to present the leader's jersey of the UCI.
And he'll receive the leader's jersey for the Cyclo-cross World Cup series. And in just a few days' time, we'll be wearing that down south in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Just 3 days away. This coming Wednesday afternoon, the whole circuit moving south.
Ladies and gentlemen, in honor of our champion, we play the national anthem of Belgium. Let's hear it again for our champions, Ailey, Michael, and Quinn.
Now the 2-time Waterloo champion on the World Cup, Eisenbeatz of Belgium. Michael van Tornhout in second, Quinten Hermans in third. The 3 Belgians sweep the podium today in Wisconsin. And Ellen, as we get set to close things out with this classic cyclocross weather today, good way to start off the new campaign, huh?
Absolutely.
Glad to have you here as we wrap up from Waterloo. And now gets set to head down south as he gets the Wisconsin hockey jersey. The Badgers that are so big here in these parts. Madison and the location of the University of Wisconsin, just about 26 miles away from here. So he'll don the hockey jersey and climb back onto the podium as we get set to say so long from here in Waterloo. And we'll see you next from Fayetteville, Arkansas on Wednesday. In the meantime, for Ellen Noble, I'm Steve Schlanger. We thank you for joining us. And now we get set to say goodbye from Waterloo, Wisconsin.
To the 11 hours to Fayetteville. Honestly, when I was still planning on racing season, I wasn't planning on going to Fayetteville. I was just going to stay between these two. Like the rest.
I mean, I get what, like, logically, you would go to Iowa City next. Like, they obviously don't want